Hello, I'm Lorraine Decter, and I'm with Action News Now and KIXE this evening, and we're happy to bring you a very important conversation on our show, North State Issues. It's a live show tonight. We're going to invite you to call in with your questions about fire season, about what's going on this fire season in particular, and also over time. And we have 3 chiefs here from various different agencies in Northern California that deal with putting out fires and protecting us from fires and try to make sure the fires don't start. I'm going to start with Ben Newbern. He is the chief of the Shasta Trinity National Forest. Thanks so much for being here. Why don't you tell us what you do and how this season has been for you so far?
Thanks, Lorraine. Glad to be here. So far, the season's been, well, I guess to start with, my name is Ben Newbern. I'm the Forest Fire Management Officer for the Shasta Trinity National Forest here in Northern California. The forest occupies lands in southern Siskiyou County, Shasta County, Trinity County, and then parts of Tehama and Humboldt County. So far, the season for the Forest Service in general, especially the Shasta Trinity, has been pretty moderate. We haven't seen some of the significant fires that we've seen in past years, and so the big influence that we've had so far is supporting our neighbors and supporting other areas of the country. We started off the year with engines in the southeastern United States, Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, and right now we're just recovering some of our firefighting resources from the Southwest and redeploying them onto fires here in California.
Have you had any recent fires that you've had to deal with, very recent?
Yeah, we've actually have fire staff today here on the forest, and it's not uncommon on any day of the week for us to have at least a fire or two, and then we work collaboratively with the partners here next to me, and so their resources are coming to fight fires on the forest, and our firefighters are going to fight fires for them.
Well, let's get next to CAL FIRE. Sean Cavanaugh is here. Chief Cavanaugh, thanks for being here.
Good evening.
Well, of course, we all know that CAL FIRE has been extremely busy in our region.
Yes. Well, first, my name is Sean Cavanaugh. I'm a division chief here in the Shasta Trinity unit with CAL FIRE and Shasta County Fire Department. I have the Central Division, which is essentially the Valley area and also the Shingletown area. So far for us up in Shasta Trinity, we've been actually very fortunate. We haven't had any major incidents so far. I think to date of today we've had approximately 70 incidents, fires that we've been on. The largest has only been 128 acres, which was 2 weekends ago up in Oak Run, and which was overnight. So we've been fortunate with the weather. We haven't had the winds or lightning that yet this summer. That's always a possibility. But with that, we have, as Ben was saying, we have a heavy grass crop and the brush that we have. So it's around the corner. We're prepared, for what's coming. I'm sure we're going to have a couple of incidents that are getting up on run on us because of the area. But we've been very fortunate so far. The rest of the state, we have been busy. Down in the central part of San Luis Obispo, the Bay Area, Butte County with a wildfire right now. Those areas have been, Fresno, those areas have been busy for us throughout the state, and also Southern California.
And wasn't somebody from the Shasta Trinity CAL FIRE region very active with the wildfire, a team, a whole team?
Chief Gavay, who's our deputy chief up here, he's the incident commander for Team 1. They're actually down in San Luis Obispo.
So they've been down there. Yeah,
he's the IC on
How's
Team
that
1.
fire going?
Right now it's 85% contained. It's 28,000 acres, but 85% contained. The wildfire is 85% contained as well tonight. And I think it's still sitting around 6,000 acres. So both of those fires are doing good.
And I believe a lot of people are saying we were saved by the lack of wind for a really more serious problems than we have.
Yeah, wind is, once we get our wind events and we get starts and fires start going, it causes us control issues. You get the convection columns moving, it starts casting out embers, and we get our spot fires out in front, and that's what starts giving us the issues for control. So far this summer, we've only had a couple of days that we've really had some wind events that we've staffed up for when we get those events. But like I said, we've been fortunate so far.
And we have one more chief with us from the BLM, Bureau of Land Management. And I want to remind people, if you have any questions for our guests, give us a call at 243-5493. That's 5493. So Walter Herzog is here, and he is with the BLM, and he has a huge area to cover, and covers most of it out of Redding, but most of your assets are in other parts of California, right?
Yes, Lorraine. The BLM manages about 3.5 million acres of public lands in Northern California, all the way from the coast over to the Nevada border. The primary place where we have our fire suppression responsibilities in northeastern California, Alturas, Susanville areas, as well as parts of northwestern Nevada. Out in the western part, we have scattered BLM lands around Redding, up in Siskiyou County, down in Tehama County, Red Bluff areas. A lot of that areas we actually work on cooperative fire agreements. So CAL FIRE, and in some areas the Forest Service, put the fires out on our public lands over here. On the east side, though, that's where we're responsible for fire suppression. And up until a couple days ago, it was actually pretty quiet for us. We'd had a few lightning fires. We have a remote area, so we don't have as much public starts, but we did have a large fire that's ongoing right now. It started just south of Susanville. It's about 30,000 acres and burned into Nevada. But we're working with the Carson City District and other cooperators, and they're getting a good handle on that fire right now.
Boy, so do you have enough funding, all of you? I'm curious to do this. We're hearing about shifts in budgets for our federal agencies. So we have 2 federal agencies here that are dealing with firefighting in our Northern California area. And CAL FIRE, we're all curious. There's talk about the fee for the rural areas for CAL FIRE that we pay with our taxes, that maybe we're not going to have to do that anymore. But we want to get a sense if your budgets are going up, going down, how is it? So let's start with Ben with Shasta Trinity National Forest.
Sure. So the proposed budget for the Forest Service is reduced pretty significantly from past years. We'll see what allocation the Congress passes for the Forest Service. It has been made pretty clear by both Congress and the administration, though, that they're strongly believe in the emergency response agencies, including the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the other federal wildland agencies, and maintaining our response capability. And so we see a fairly stable budget in the future for fire response, maybe not so much for other areas of the agency.
How about for CAL FIRE?
And for us, the same thing. I think we've been fortunate as well. We've been stable with our budget, especially operationally wise, that we have, and which is a good thing for us in the entire state, because we're a large department with over 7,000 employees and all the equipment and all the programs that we have. So, and I think that's a good thing for us, that our budget does stay stable and kind of have the status quo for now.
Chief Herzog, how about BLM?
As a public land management agency, a lot of our other resource programs, wildlife and forestry, they're seeing some cuts right now, but fire, again, we see that as a program. We want to make sure we don't impact that too much. So we're pretty stable, but there's always, it's not, with a stable budget and increasing costs, sometimes we're still trying to do more with less sometimes.
So do you guys have to do a lot of just mainly firefighting, or are you able to do enough of the preventive work that you feel is prescribed and necessary? What do you think?
Those are positions now. If we have a shrinking budget that we look at, should we just focus on staffing our engines and making sure the lookouts are staffed, or our hand crews? But we still feel that's an important program. We have fuels programs. We like to do some projects on the land. So for planning those projects, implementing them, that takes time. But those we do oftentimes have to balance that, whether we're going to have the funds to do those.
Are you doing as many as you used to?
I'd say no, and it's more just because it's a challenge publicly to implement. There's a lot of parts, getting a plan together, getting environmental analysis done, finding the right window of opportunity to do it when the smoke's not going to impact a community or the weather's correct. Mm-hmm. But we still are implementing projects.
Yeah, I would agree with Chief Herzog. It's not all related to funding. The fuels deficit that we find ourselves in after a century of fire suppression, there is no shortage of work to be done, and so it's a matter of prioritizing that work, finding the right spot to do that work, and making sure that we have all the other stars in alignment, if you will, that we have to go through in order to complete a project and reduce fuels on the landscape.
So I don't know, for CAL FIRE, I imagine, we've had this, whether you call it a fire tax or a fire fee, there have been some projects. So have you seen these projects, on the ground, and you think they're making a big difference?
Absolutely. So,
Feedback in here.
absolutely, we have the funds through that. The funds through that have gone to projects for fuels reduction that we have. A good example of that is here in Shasta County over on the Bernie fuel break that's been completed over there with the fuel break.
Where is that?
Yeah, right behind the community of Bernie. We have a fuels project that has been taking place for the last couple of years over there that is created a shaded fuel break. But a lot of those funds and a lot of the fuel reductions, our department's really been moving forward here in the last couple of years with getting back into the fuels reduction, getting back into looking at doing vegetation management burns that we're doing. And it ties back in both what Ben and Walter are talking about, is getting into those fuels management and reduction. And so those fees, they also go towards our defensible space inspectors that we have. It goes to the conservation districts. There's grants that are available. So that's what a lot of those fees out of that SRA tax go to.
And are your firefighters, did they do that work?
Yes, we have. We have some of the crews in cooperation with the Department of Corrections. We have different fuels crews that we go out and be able to take care of those projects for us.
So do we have enough firefighters working with all your agencies this summer for the needs that we have here in Northern California?
So for the Forest Service, all of our modules, all of our engines and crews and helicopters are fully staffed. We're always looking for the next group of firefighters, applicants for next fire season. So that is always a revolving door. We're always promoting people into new positions, creating openings at the entry level. But all of our modules, all of our engines are at capacity and ready to respond to fire.
Yeah, we're in the same area. We've full capacity that we have. We have 3.0 staffing on most of our engines. I think we have 6 engines. We have 4.0 staffing on that are extra allocated staffing throughout the state that we have, which is a good thing. And I think, you can say, do we have enough firefighters? Well, I don't know if we can ever have enough, but we have enough to be able to handle our operational area that we're all in charge of and responsible for.
Yeah, and each one of our chiefs at each field office, whether it's over in Arcata, Redding, or Susanville, Alturas, they all every year are hiring seasonal firefighters to staff the engines as well as permanent. So there's, as Ben mentioned, there's the revolving door. One transferred to Wyoming, so now we have an opening there. So that's always a challenge. And then with that is, okay, if somebody's missing, how do we staff that engine with the qualified people? So those are the things we deal with day to day, staffing an engine, dealing with vacancies or an equipment breakdown. Always making sure, though, that we're ready. We have minimum staffing capabilities that we have to achieve every day.
So you guys, when you have a fire, do you call each other? I need help?
The dispatch center will do that for us, but actually sometimes we do a little, hey, I need an engine from Ben's Shasta Trinity, and definitely we work a lot with CAL FIRE over on the east side, cooperating.
On the wall fire, it's early in this season. This is in Butte County that we're talking about, and it started erupting very quickly and in very difficult terrain, of course. So we start looking at that, and I wonder why it takes so long, it seems like, to get a mass group of people. There were just a few people that were gathered together from the local CAL FIRE working on that fire, and you wonder how 200 people or 300 or 400 can just be fighting this, what they were calling a monster fire. But then you start seeing truck after truck after truck come in, but the numbers don't rise for a while. Why does it take so long for the number of personnel in a fire to go up? What are the variables?
Well, here's an example. Today the Modoc National Forest has a fire, and we have a certain number of engines on our district that we have to staff, but we want to support them. So we did provide one engine, but we still have to think about we don't want to have another fire in our area, have all the engines leave. Sometimes we get an order for 5 engines or a strike team to go to Southern California. And it takes a long time for an engine to drive from Susanville down to Los Angeles.
And then
10
they make you
hours.
sleep for a while, right? I mean, you can't just go in there and
Yeah.
start working. I imagine there's a time period where you have
So
to
it
rest.
it takes a while. It might seem like it takes a while, but it probably really isn't that long.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cooperative effort. Doesn't matter if it's in the North State or the southern part of the state. There's a cooperative effort to move resources around between all the agencies, no matter whose jurisdiction it is or whose fire it is. But also, what's important too, though, is let's say we have a fire here in Shasta County that breaks, we've got to send a lot of equipment to that, but we also have our responsibilities for the next medical aid that comes in, for the next traffic accident, for the next structure fire. And so we have to keep a minimum amount of resources back at the stations themselves, or we have to get stuff to come in to cover behind, so there's a leg time. We throw as much as we can at our incidents because our goal for us as CAL FIRE to keep every fire under 10 acres. Does that always happen? No, it doesn't, but we give that effort to try to do that. But then there's all the stuff behind that. We still have our everyday jobs that our folks still have to do for the public. That's what we're there for.
It seems like a constant juggling act, with the wildfire.
Yep.
Listening to Reading Fire Chief Jerry Gray talk about how many personnel and engines were sent to the wildfire, and you were talking about how many you sent. It's like,
Yeah.
you have to cover all your stations here and all these things. I imagine it's kind of difficult.
I think it's a good dance between the units and the regions. What I mean by regions, the northern region and the southern region. We all have the regions and all the different jurisdictions, all the different agencies that we have. In California, we have just an outstanding cooperative relationship with all the fire agencies. It doesn't matter if it's the local government, if it's into our federal partners or the state partners, districts, how it is. We have a great relationship, and I know up here in Shasta County, with the gentleman sitting next to me, we have in all the agencies up here, not only us, but with all the fire agencies here in Shasta County, we just have a really good relationship. And so of sharing resources when we need.
What are the qualities of a good firefighter? What are you looking for when you're hiring? Or what are you not looking for? What makes you think this person will work and this person might not?
The interesting thing about firefighting is it's both physical. I think everybody can identify the physical attributes that are needed to fight fire, especially wildland fire. The long hours, the physical endurance that's required, things of that sort. But it's also a mental game. There's a lot of thinking that goes into firefighting and making sure that you're in a safe place and thinking about where the fire is at and the activities that you're doing and the risks that are associated with that and making sure that you and the people around you are staying safe. So the people we tend to look for are people that have experience with that. A lot of them are attributes that we pick up in athletics coming up through school. People that are students that are interested in learning and educating themselves and becoming just better people. That those characteristics lend themselves really well to firefighting because there's so many different nuances to the work that we do that we're always in training, we're always taking classes, and so if somebody comes in with a mindset ready to do that, they'll be very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, and along with what Ben said, you can't be one-dimensional. There's so many different tasks that you have to, especially for us, an all-risk department that you do. There's so many tasks and skills that you have to learn that you can't be one-dimensional. And so the folks that come in that, obviously a physical portion of it is a big thing, but also having the intellectual portion of it and wanting to learn. And then really I think it comes down to the passion. I think that's why I'm still, I've been with the department 29 years, the passion of the very first time I went to a class when I was in high school, I was like, that's what I want to do. And so I think that's also very important as well. It goes along with all the other attributes you need to have.
Yeah, it can be exciting. It's like solving a problem. Okay, we have this incident here. How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to respond? How are we going to put it to bed? Put that fire out. How are we going to approach it? What resources? And you get to go to different areas, places people never really see. It's interesting.
Flexible.
Yeah.
The jobs changes all the time. Huh?
Yeah. This morning I was near the Nevada border for a fire briefing, and now I'm here in Reading. So you never know.
You were at the morning briefing.
Morning briefing.
And how was it?
It's going really well.
Mm-hmm.
Got good
Tell us
folks
the
over
situation up there.
The last couple days, it was a fast-moving fire, burned from California into Nevada, but overnight the humidities went up, and the fire actually moved higher up in elevation, and well, we haven't talked about the grass crop this year, but the lowlands where the grass was really dry, and that's where the fire really spread and grew rapidly. But now it's moved up to some mountains near Fort Sage, just along the Nevada border, and the Air Attack was reporting that now where the fire's burning, it's a lot greener up there, and it's just kind of slowing down quite a bit. So I think that's where we're going to be able to get a good handle on it.
We still have some moisture and snow up in our hills, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, certainly.
So that's a good thing
yeah,
It's
but,
great.
for the fire season right
but
now.
a lot of grass.
I wanted to invite people to call if you have questions. We have representatives from 3 different agencies in Northern California that deal with fighting fires on our public lands and on our private lands as well. We have CAL FIRE, we have Bureau of Land Management, and the National Forest, all represented here, the Shasta Trinity. Ben Newbern is with the Shasta Trinity. He's the chief for fire there. Sean Kavanaugh is a chief over at the Shasta Trinity unit for CAL FIRE, and Walter Herzog is over at the Bureau of Land Management District Fire Management Officer, correct?
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you guys before we get off the jobs kind of situation. We have several young people, you know, that may be watching or are looking for work and wonder if this is their career. So I wonder if you could tell us about some of the ways they can gain that knowledge and training here in Northern California. My understanding is we have some great facilities for training and firefighting. Is that the way it is?
We do, and so we have a lot of folks come in and ask that for advice about what is a way to get into the fire service. And the community colleges here, Shasta College, Butte College, Yuba College, Siskiyou, those are all outstanding fire academies that we have here in California. Kids come from all over to go to those academies. Also volunteering, be it a volunteer if you can, if you have a local county fire department or a local district or a city, however you can volunteer, and then just start taking classes and start taking fire academy classes at the college. And those are good, but I think that the volunteering and the academies really get you started with the entry level that you need for any department, even for if you're going into a local city jurisdiction, with the hazmat stuff that you have to have, and the EMS and the basic training that you have. And so the colleges, you cannot go wrong.
And as a entry into that, also a lot of our high schools now have ROP programs, ways that students. So you can't start fighting fire, at least get a job until you're 18.
Right.
But many high schools now in the area are starting to offer programs to provide some of that initial training so that they hit the ground running. For the federal agencies, since we are natural resource agencies, also college educations in natural resources, so forestry and the biological sciences, is also something that we look at and strongly recruit for.
And a Foothill was brought up as one of the
Yes.
local in this area around Shasta County that has a really good
fire
program.
training program, and the way I understand it, if whatever high school you go to in the Reading area, you can still go to that program at Foothill, sign up and be a part of it.
Well, that sounds really, really
I'm
good.
a high school RP. I did that when I was in high school. Yep.
That's how you got into this. What made you want to do it?
I had family that was in the fire service at the time too, and so but as soon as I got into
It was the natural thing to do.
yeah.
How about you, Chief Herzog? How did you get into this business?
Well, I grew up in back east, and other than reading Smokey Bear comics books, fire was not a big part of the community. I got a job as a Student Conservation Association volunteer at a forest in Colorado. I was actually doing recreation work, but I got trained, got to take one class in fire, and got on a few fires, and that was it. I mean, I just really enjoyed that and just wanted to keep getting into that type of work. So.
How about you, Chief Newbern? What do you think?
So I kind of grew up in a very rural setting. I grew up in the small town of Walla Walla, Washington, and my mother's side of the family was strongly ingrained in agriculture that's familiar in the Southern Palouse. And then my dad had a history in logging, has a degree in logging engineering. And so I grew up from an early age in the woods, outside, outdoors, and going to college, I knew that I wanted to study a natural resource program of some sort, and I just happened to fall into fire management as an aspect of that. And they say you get bit by the fire bug. I was very much bit by the fire bug, and the rest is history.
I have a couple of questions that have come in from our viewers. How do you decide where the control burns are and when? This is from Patty in Reading.
Well, we generally you try to pick the most strategic location, and control burns, I think she's referring to prescribed burns. So often a ridge top or along a road. Sean mentioned that they're building a fuel break outside around the community of Bernie. That would be a place where you could start. But we start a lot of them. It varies, but it's usually along a ridge or a roadside.
Someplace where you see this is going to make a defendable place where we could put our equipment and actually get it
or if you
in
think
the right
about,
position.
We've been looking along the 299 corridor heading towards Weaverville. We know that's a place where there could be some human fire starts. Let's do the best job we can, reduce the fuels along that corridor. So if there is a fire, it's not going to get big so fast, and we can get to it quicker. So those would be places where we choose.
Here's a question actually specifically for BLM from Kyla in Cottonwood. What can a citizen do to help prevent fires?
What can a citizen
do to help prevent fires?
They can do the best job they can on their property of increasing defensible space. Just thinking about, we all know if you have a lot of vegetation, grasses and fuels, cut that grass down. Reduce the fuels around your homes, or think about if you have some trees around your property, get rid of some of the lower limbs. So if there is just a fire in the grass, it's not going to go up into the trees and create a bigger fire.
They say 100 feet.
Yep.
Now, do you guys at your homes think 100 feet's enough, or do you have like more clearance than that? Because you guys know. What do you have at your place?
I have 100 feet at my place.
Yes, I'm good.
I have a house less than 100 feet away, so I live in the city. I feel pretty safe.
Yep.
I just wonder if it's like, no, I have 200 feet because I know what these
It'd
fires
be a bad
do.
example if we didn't.
Yeah. And I think that also pertains to then if you have fire coming and an engine that was going to come to protect your home, they wouldn't want to be standing up against that dense vegetation. They want to have something that they can feel, okay, I can see around and do a defensible.
How much trouble do you have just getting equipment into places when the roads aren't wide enough and things? Is that something that people could do that would make a huge difference in if they had a fire near their rural home?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Access is one of our big issues in the North State. In rural areas, poorly marked access routes and addresses, just knowing that there's a home down the road is a big issue. Narrow access, our equipment is not getting any smaller. Our dozer transports are, they're full-size semi-trucks, and our engines are fairly large vehicles as well. And so being able to access fires is a big issue. And so if you have a driveway or something, having it well marked, having it brushed back so it provides easy access and good clearance is instrumental in us being successful.
I think along with that too, if you have a narrow driveway, at least if you have where your residence is, have enough room for the apparatus to turn around. That is key to have. So we don't want to get our apparatus in where they're stuck in facing. They want to be able to get turned around to be able to face out if they have to go.
When you are fighting these fires and your folks go out and they are going to do some kind of structure protection or work on this, they kind of can just drive up or try to drive up, and they can tell if they have a chance of saving the house, can't they? Just by the conditions around it?
Oh yeah, they're trained to have that quick assessment. Is there dense vegetation right up against the house? What's the condition of the shingles? What type of roof do you have? What are the things around? Is there a wood pile up against the house? All that stuff applies, yeah. And just access. Can they get in and out if it gets worse?
So one person asked, Mark from Cottonwood, what should I do if I see a grass fire on I-5?
Call 911.
Call 911. Just like any.
Don't assume it's already been called in. Just go ahead
Don't
and
make
call.
an assumption. Dial 911 just like any emergency and report it. The 911 dispatcher, as you start to tell them the situation that you see unfolding in front of you, they'll know whether or not it's already been reported and is being responded to or otherwise. Many of our prescribed fires, and so for the Shasta Trinity, we have quite a bit of our protection in our lands along I-5 from Shasta Lake up to Mount Shasta and actually beyond Mount Shasta. If we're doing prescribed fire, our signage along the highway is pretty well signed. You're going to know that if that's a prescribed fire, that you're going to see that well in advance of actually seeing the smoke. So if you don't see any signage and you see a fire, you don't see any apparatus, anybody engaging that fire, it's a good idea to call 911.
Absolutely.
Here's a question from a viewer. Are you allowed to burn if within a city limits in a residential neighborhood? And if so, what are the time frame limits? Are there certain hours, certain months?
So the local jurisdictions of the city of Reading, they have their own burn restrictions, and so that's outside of what Ben has with the Forest Service or we have with CAL FIRE or with BLM. So that you'd have to check with your local jurisdiction. Let's say it's the city of Reading or in Anderson or so forth. You'd have to check what those burn regulations are for them. So,
Are there anything that is common across our region? I know a lot of burn restrictions change at the end of May. I mean, there are some common times when
so
ask people
for
to
us
stop.
statewide, our burn, we declared fire season in end of May, and then there was the statewide burn ban went into effect just here towards the end of June. So that's statewide no burning. So that's for state lands that that are state lands and the privately owned lands that we have. So. And then you guys can answer yours for.
Yeah, so federally, we have some protection responsibilities for private lands through agreement with CAL FIRE, but what Chief Kavanaugh just spoke to applies there. On National Forest System lands, on public lands in general, obviously there's no debris burning done by public, so that by itself is not something that you should be doing. Campfires, things like that, we go into campfire restrictions, not by a calendar date, but when fire danger reaches a certain level. Matter of fact, the BLM went into fire restrictions a week ago or thereabouts, and then the national forests, the Mendocino, the Shasta Trinity, the Six Rivers, and the Klamath National Forest, so the majority of the Northern California National Forest System lands are going into restrictions this weekend.
So does that mean when you go camping, you cannot start a fire in your campfire pit?
Only in designated areas. So our designated campgrounds that have the steel fire rings, you can have a fire within that, but not outside. So
What do the backwoods people do who go farther into the backwoods? They're not allowed to start a campfire.
Fire restrictions.
no,
It's too dry.
no campfires. You can have a stove that burns some sort of fuel. The good way to remember what you can do is you have to be able to turn the fire off. So charcoal, anything that you can't just immediately shut off is restricted.
Safest way is not to have any type of fire, but if you have to for heating or cooking or whatever your need may be, make sure it's in a good secure area that you can make sure you can maintain it and put it out.
We have Kyle in Reading who called and said, what kind of building materials would you recommend in regards to fire safety? For example, metal roofing or siding, sprinkler systems to spray down the top of a building or a roof. Have you seen preventative measures like this make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. Metal roofs, stucco siding, non-wood decks that they have out, different materials now.
It's expensive, isn't it?
It is.
But it's extraordinary. I mean,
It is.
I saw one like right off the Butte Creek Canyon up in Paradise. Somebody was with the Fire Safe Council and went up and saw this incredible deck, and it's not made of wood, and it's fire safe.
Yeah, any materials that you could do like that, especially if you live in a rural area where there may be fire prone, and then it really comes back down to dispensable space. It really does. As long as you've taken care of your property, cleared your landscape down, you got rid of the grass away from your habitable structures, limbed up your trees, kept stuff back. That's really where it starts. But yes, that stuff it definitely helps if you have that type of building construction.
We're North State Issues here on KIXE-TV. And I wanted to thank our guests here, and we will take your questions. If you have questions for our chiefs from the BLM, from the Shasta Trinity National Forest, and from this region up here for CAL FIRE. So here's the number to call if you have a question, 243-5493. That number again, 243-5493. So what is it about California? What is it about the terrain that makes the fires the way they are? And is it getting worse? Is it getting better?
Well, there's a thing we call, in the fire science, we call the fire triangle that drives fire. And well, actually there's two triangles. So the one I'm thinking of is fuels, weather, and topography. Those three factors influence fire behavior. And so in California, speaking to the topography piece, we have some very steep, rugged, and inaccessible terrain that makes it difficult to access, and then makes it very easy for fires to burn. Fires burn uphill. The steeper the ground, the faster they go. Weather, we live in a Mediterranean climate. We have hot, dry summers, sometimes very long summers. Those make the area very prone to fires. And then vegetation, we have some very flammable vegetation in California. Grass in the valleys that is very fast burning and very easy to ignite. Brush, which creates extraordinary fire behavior. I think we've all seen that on television when we have fires that are burning out of control. And then even our timbered landscapes, those heavy, dense forests, provide a resistance to control, if you will, that make it difficult to put out.
You know, we're seeing explosive fires. I was covering in Mendocino County, the Valley Fire, Rocky Fire, Jerusalem Fire. We saw this video recently of the wall fire that University of Nevada ran, where they took that Oroville Dam camera, turned it around to the fire near Oroville, and then did a time lapse of that. And you could just see the fire behavior in a way that you don't always get to see. Maybe you guys get to see that a lot, but it was really unusual. Is there a big difference now in the way that these grasses and the brush was, I know in the Valley Fire, was extremely explosive.
This is a fire-adapted environment, so the mountains, the brushy hillsides, the chaparral of California, the oak woodlands, that's all been shaped by years and years of fire. I mean, we were talking earlier about fire seasons, memorable fire seasons. 2008, all of a sudden there's lightning strikes all across Northern California, dry lightning that just sparked all these fires. And if we think about it, if nobody was here, those fires would have spread. Or even if you could think of a fire starting down in the valley in June, and if nobody put it out, it might slowly work its way up towards the high mountains, and as they dry out, eventually go. So we don't have that anymore. So in some areas, yes, we have places where it hasn't burned very much or as frequently, and if it doesn't burn as frequently, there's more vegetation or more fuel as part of that triangle that Ben mentioned to fuel the fire and create sometimes some extreme fire behavior.
Is California different than other states? How are we different?
We do have a long fire season, that Mediterranean climate, and I think it also has to do with the amount of moisture we get also in the winter that creates the vegetation. I mean, we have a variety of ecosystems here: the redwood forest, the sequoias that are adapted to fire. So it's just the variety of fuel and the terrain that we have here. It's not flat.
Well, Sean Kavanaugh is here with CAL FIRE, and I always think of CAL FIRE as putting out fires more than setting controlled burns, on prescribed burns and things. But on the federal level, with the BLM and with the National Forest, we saw some trends over the past years where maybe we're going to start letting fire burn out a little bit and not just try to put it out right away. Where are we at now in that balance between letting fires burn or putting them out quickly?
Sure. So the federal agencies have explored managing fire for a resource benefit, an objective other than suppression, for several decades. I think some of the first fires that were managed this way actually happened here in California in Yosemite and Sequoia Kings National Parks. The Forest Service started doing it in some of the large wilderness areas in central Idaho and western Montana around about that same time. And so the last handful of years here in California specifically, it's been very difficult to consider that. One thing that we always look at when we're trying to consider managing a fire for a resource objective is it the right time and place to do so? And so as we've gone through the drought these last handful of years, it's just simply not been the right time or the right place. This year, we're afforded maybe some more flexibility with that because, as we were talking about earlier, at higher elevation, conditions are such that fires are going to burn in a low to moderate severity way, similar to how they historically would have prior to Western settlement, things of that sort. We have to weigh that, though, against resource commitments and the need to support fires that are occurring in other areas of the state where those right time, right place situations aren't occurring. One of the things that is happening today, we have a fire that started about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, up on the Klamath National Forest in the Marble Mountain Wilderness, the Island Fire. And that fire received an initial response with some smoke jumpers. They analyzed the fire, reported back into fire managers at the office, at the supervisor's office, and some decisions were made based on, again, that right time, right place to allow that fire to meet some natural resource objectives. And so in the last week and a half, 10 days or so that fire's been burning, it's burned up to about 1,000 acres in the Marble Mountains and is burning up against previous fires that occurred in the last handful of years up there. And so we get into a situation that we call self-regulated fire. So it'll bump into a past fire where the fuel hasn't recovered and check itself up, if you will. And so we're allowing that fire to meet a resource objective and good for the environment, good for the ecosystem.
Yeah. I remember we did a prescribed burn once when I worked with the parks up here near Lassen Park, and we'd done one burn the one year in a very dense timbered fuel area, and the following year we were conducting another prescribed burn to build off of that and kind of build a bigger area more defensible, and some trees torched off, which we allowed a few of those in the prescription, and they started sending embers into the previous burn, and several of us, the younger firefighters, were saying, boss, we should put those out. And he said, no, just let's see what happens. And they didn't do anything. They just, because we had burned there the previous years, like Ben mentioned, it just, that fuel reduction, it was so great. They just kind of just sat there and nothing happened. So you could really see the effects of just one entry of a prescribed fire or a little bit of fire, how that reduced the fire behavior in that area.
So Chief Herzog, I really want you to tell us about the sage grouse, because I think it's interesting that BLM in Northern California, Northeastern California, your firefighting is impacted by this bird. Tell us about this.
So last few years, the national program or national office has noticed that the sage grouse that grows or cohabitates in the sagebrush habitat, the population is decreasing. And it's an important species, or people don't want to make it threatened and endangered. And what they saw was oftentimes we have these large fires in the Great Basin that would burn through sagebrush habitat, and what would come in is exotic species such as cheatgrass. So we're actually seeing a conversion from a brushland, a sagebrush land, to a grassland. Well, the sage grouse doesn't like grass as much as sagebrush, so that's where we're seeing the population declines. So the direction now is, let's not make sure that we have these large fires burning across the landscape that will not come back as sage grouse, or sagebrush, excuse me.
So you're putting out the fires quicker.
Yeah, so we're getting some funding to make sure we detect those fires earlier, keep them smaller, and if they do burn, make sure there's some sagebrush left behind that'll provide that seed source to rehabilitate that area. So it's just a shift, managing for different species.
And you get a little more funding in your budget
We have
because
gotten
of that?
some funding because there's an emphasis on making sure that sage grouse doesn't get endangered or listed.
We have a question from a listener in Oroville, lives in a wooded high-risk area and the insurance canceled the policy. Is this legal? You're not attorneys, you're fire chiefs. We know that.
And I think best thing to do is to call your insurance agency, obviously, and find out why it was canceled or what the circumstances were from. I mean, that'd be the first place to start.
I know in Chico, when CAL FIRE was discussing some of the areas around and closing certain CAL FIRE departments, it was an issue on the insurance, like how many miles that you live to a fire station.
That's true.
Is CAL FIRE going, I don't know what's happening up here, but Chief Kevin, I'm just wondering, are you closing stations? Are you opening more? Are you just status quo? What's happening up
No,
here?
we're not. As far as CAL FIRE, no, we're not closing any stations. So we have 14 fire stations that we have up here in the Shasta Training Unit for us, with a total of 20 engines we're staffing this summer. So, and some of those are seasonal, and then some are open year round. So.
A question from Bill. In terms of defensive space, should trees be 10 feet, 30 feet, or 100 feet apart?
Good question. If there's a green lawn under it, you can go with 10 feet. But if they're wider, it depends on the size of the crown too. If they're 30 feet apart and they got a narrow crown, then there's that space in between them, and that should be pretty good. 100 feet.
Does it depend if it's an evergreen or not? Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Tree species plays in space, and then also something that we call ladder fuels, which provides fuel for the fire to move vertically. Just the tree by itself isn't necessarily the bad thing. It's those low-lying branches, and so if you have the ability to prune that tree up and get it to where fire can't reach the crown, then you'll be in a better place.
If you have any questions for our guests from our 3 fire chiefs with BLM, National Forest, and CAL FIRE, give us a call at 243-5493. Here's a question I wanted to ask for a while. A lot of times people talk about there's a fire near their home, say in Paradise in 2008. Some people would say, so I turned on my sprinklers and I left the sprinklers on. And then some people say, I go up on the roof. Somebody had written a question where they asked, what can you do? Should you put a sprinkler on your roof before you evacuate or leave the area? But I was remembering back in 2008, there might have been some issues with water pressure and things like that with a firefighter. So what kind of recommendations do you have about using your sprinklers and water to help protect your own household?
It's a tough call.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I don't think I would want to tell anybody not to ever do what they think is right for their own home. But you're right about if you're on a well and if there's standpipes in the area, whatever it is, with the water pressure can be an issue for the fire crews if we have a bunch of people doing that. But you have to do, I think, at the time you've got to do what you think is right for that. Is it going to hurt? It's probably not going to hurt anything to have the sprinklers going, especially if it's a slow-moving fire with not a lot of intensity to it, and maybe it's a ground fire that's moving up towards your residence. Those sprinklers may help. If it is a full-blown moving timber fire like we just saw down the wall fire, that's got a lot of heat and intensity to it. The amount of heat that's putting off, those sprinklers may not do a whole lot. And so, like I said, once again, I wouldn't want to tell anybody to do what they think at the moment is right for their own residence.
And how far do those embers fly? When you're in a fire, say the wind's pushing,
we can get
how far, how fast?
It's very common to have a ember land and generate a spot fire a quarter to a half a mile. That's very typical. For one to travel well past a mile, upwards to 2 miles, is not unheard of.
So really, when you get down to the person who called in and said, what should I do if I see a fire on I-5? Really, the faster these fires are called in, the better chance you have. We saw right after the wall fire, the one that started off of Forbestown Road, which could have been a similar fire to the one that all those people were there to fight. They got it in a very short time. Luckily, they had air tankers scheduled to come, but they kept it boxed in about 5 acres. That started from a house fire. There's a lot of fires we were talking earlier, start from vehicles, cars. Got to get them out really quick, get them reported first. That's the first step, right?
And I think it's important to touch on what you just said about a house fire. So people always think about defensible space, about a fire moving into their property. Really defensible space way back when was preventing fire starting in a residence and moving out to the wildland. And so there's two sides of it. We get so focused on a lot of the public get focused on fires moving in, but the other cases. So if there is a structure fire and you do have good clearance, your proper clearance around your home, you may prevent that fire from moving from your residence out into the wildland and then cause another issue.
To your neighbor's house.
Right.
So do you ever suggest people like buy that structure wrapping stuff that I know firefighters use sometimes on structures? Maybe if they're historic structures or such, you'll find them wrapping with this very expensive, I understand, material. Is that something the homeowners can get?
They can certainly get it. It's available through a number of different vendors. Similar to what Chief Kavanaugh was just saying, I don't think any of us would recommend doing or not doing certain things. If it's something that you feel is prudent to protect your structure or protect your home, then by all means, go ahead and do it. One of the things to think about, though, related to those structure wraps is it takes, A, they're very expensive, and then B, they take a little bit of time to put up around your structure. It's like wrapping your house in aluminum foil. So in order to have enough time to wrap your structure, you probably have other measures that you could be doing that might be as effective and not cost as much money.
So I'm very curious how technology may be changing things in terms of firefighting. We wonder if there will be fire lookouts in the future. Will they be replaced by technology? Of course, you don't have a lot of electricity to just plug in up in those places. I guess you use generators. How will we see differences in the way we fight fires as technology improves?
So I think as far as fire detection and lookouts go, there will always be room for the manned lookout. For the Forest Service, for the federal agencies, the idea of the fire lookout on the mountaintop is very embedded in our culture, and I don't see that going away. But at the same time, we have embraced technology. We're using manned aircraft. We're starting to explore the use of drones for fire detection and intelligence gathering. We're utilizing satellites and satellite data, a number of different sources to detect and report wildland fires.
So that's on the reporting end. How about on the firefighting end?
I think where we're at, I think the big leaps and bounds that we've made in technology, especially, is with mapping, and especially on the large incidents, how we do that now with the aircraft. As an IC or an operations chief on one of these incidents, we get the flights in the evening time. They can pinpoint down with GPS coordinates to every little hot spot that they find. I think that has been crucial the last 5 to 10 years.
The wildfire, we had this great interactive map that we could zoom in and zoom out on the computer and see where the closures were. It was really
just
really
everything,
a development.
from everything from our maps to Google Earth, everything that is utilized nowadays. There's so much technology out there that we can utilize to help, in the firefight. It may not be actually not putting a shovel in the ground, but there's a lot more behind the whole incident than just the boots on the ground as well.
When are the drones coming to help us put out the fires?
That is a good question.
Is it?
I don't have that information, but I think probably we may not see that in our careers. I'm not sure. I know they've used them on different incidents. They've been used. I know that they were used down on the rough fire down a few years ago. So I think that's a good technology. It's one of those things that have to get played. The other thing, when we start talking about aircraft, there's such a with the air program and the air tankers and the helicopters and the air attacks, and how that is coordinated is, it's an act of science how that is coordinated. So now you're taking an unmanned aircraft, and that would have to be something else that would have to be looked at. So.
And one thing, while we're on the subject of drones, that's worth mentioning, and it's a campaign that all the agencies are involved in. It's If You Fly, We Can't campaign. and I think many of your viewers probably have heard about it, but drones have become very popular to the public. And one thing to think about is our aviation assets that we use on fires fly in a very complex airspace, and it's very risky. And so anytime we have aircraft, in this case drones, flying in that's not part of that mission, it jeopardizes that. And we oftentimes have had to ground our aircraft in our missions, which endangers the lives of firefighters and puts people at risk.
And you just lost a firefighter recently with the National Forest.
Yeah, unrelated to drones, but we had a firefighter unfortunately pass away this last weekend during a physical training hike over on the Six Rivers National Forest over on the coast.
We're very sorry to hear that, and I care a lot about the families of the firefighters, and you probably are like families to each other. We have one person that wrote in from Reading, Shelley, and she said, when there's a huge fire and they have the fire camps and all these things, what can the community do? Should they bring water to the firefighters? You know, can they offer them places to stay? We just have a minute or two, a couple minutes left. What can the people do to help the firefighters?
You know what I kind of really do take pride or like is the signs. Occasionally, just a nice sign, thank you. That it just strikes a chord.
Just makes you feel.
Thank you, fire folks. Just a little sign. And I know we were doing that for the folks that were helping with the dam. So you heard that in the news locally about the kids on the side of the road. Thank you for helping, work on the Oroville Dam. So.
How about supplies, water, music,
100%
entertainment?
agree with Walter. Just the signs are great. Besides that, once we get a large incident set up, it's pretty self-sufficient with logistics and supplies and housing and food and everything else.
So it's more the evacuees that are needing that kind of stuff.
And that's what I was just going to go to. Really, that's where people, if you really want to help, look at the people who've lost homes or evacuees, folks who are not in their homes, and that's where really the help needs to start. Right there.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And what is that, besides the if you fly, we don't, it's like one less spark, one less wildfire, is that it?
That is, yes.
That's an important thing for us all to remember because it's dry. We're lucky if a similar situation to the wildfire that we didn't have the winds as big. As we're talking about it, when the winds come up and the fire's big, it's very dangerous. So be safe this fire season. And if you have any other questions, you can contact these folks in their offices. We have Ben Newbern, who is the fire chief with the Shasta Trinity National Forest, Sean Kavanaugh, chief at the CAL FIRE Shasta Trinity Unit, and Walter Herzog, who's the district fire management officer for our Bureau of Land Management division up here. Thank you all so much for coming in. I know you guys are all busy fighting fires. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
This is KIXE-TV. I'm Lorraine Dector. Thanks to our all volunteers running the cameras here this evening as well. Thank you.